Thank you for joining. We'll wait a few minutes for all participants to log on. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Capitalizing on Your Customer Conversations. My name is Chelsea and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items to walk through. Our webinar today will run about 50 minutes, with 5 to 10 minutes for questions at the end. We encourage you to engage on Twitter with our hashtag #ConversationROI. Questions can be submitted either through Twitter with hashtag #ConversationROI or through the chat window that should appear in the right-hand side of your screen. You may submit questions or comments at any time during the presentation. All comments will be addressed during the allotted time for Q&A. Let's start by introducing our presenters. Our MC today, Marcia Bastos, has an all-encompassing knowledge of the English language. Her expertise in verbal communication skills can be seen through the hosting of linguistic focus groups and presenting at international conferences. Her written skills through her publications and her experience in optimizing customer communications at SPLICE have also contributed to her expertise in this area. Also joining us today is Tracy Bradley, Director of Marketing and Client Care at SPLICE Software. With powerful management and marketing expertise in the area of corporate communication, she will be providing us with some real-world examples of how well-crafted customer message can improve your customer engagement as well as corporate ROI. Welcome, Marcia and Tracy.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Before we begin, I'd like to give some background on who SPLICE is as an organization and why we've decided to sponsor this webinar. SPLICE connects businesses with their customers by utilizing customer data to generate personalized, data-driven dialogue. Linguistically optimized scripting is used to impact customers with timely, relevant conversations. Our use of professional voice talent, coupled with a linguistic optimization strategy, ensures that SPLICE communications hold the right sentiment. And now I'll pass it off to Marcia to begin our webinar.
Thanks, Chelsea. My name is Marcia Bastos, and as Chelsea mentioned, I'll be your MC. Today we're going to talk about capitalizing on your customer conversations. Let's quickly break that down into some digestible parts. When we say that we're capitalizing something, it means that we're turning it into money, the thing that keeps all of our businesses running. And as you can probably guess, your customer conversations are interactions that happen with your customers on a daily basis through a variety of channels. Capitalizing on your customer conversations is all about making the most of what you already have to work with and implementing strategic changes that will help you in that endeavor. What we're going to look at today is how to make the most of what you know about your customers, to talk to them in a smart way, which in turn becomes dollars in your pocket. So let's take a look at the agenda. We'll be covering the benefits of a great conversation, linguistically optimizing customer communications, strategic messaging best practices, turning your conversations into money, and real-world implementations. Let's get started. The first step is to look at the basics of conversation. Our friends in the linguistics community always emphasize that language is the interaction of words with one's social and cultural environment. What these applied linguists are trying to say is that there's something more to language than just a dictionary. People, culture, climate, even time availability, music preference, any of these can influence language greatly. For example, as we deal with shorter attention spans, we get more abbreviated words like app. Remember the root of that word, application? Well, that takes far too long for some of us to say nowadays. So depending on your specific customers, you'll want to have certain linguistic expectations to abide by when having a conversation. Again, and I can't stress this enough, in order to truly understand our customers and in order to really connect with them, we need to speak their language. I've always loved this quotation by Nelson Mandela. It speaks directly to the fact that just by using words, you can speak to your customers' heads. But really, what we're trying to do is to keep them coming back and to speak to their hearts. The only way to do that is to really listen to and understand to what your customers are telling you. How is this possible? Well, as Dr. Lieberman, a professor of social cognitive neuroscience, says, our brains are wired to go social. According to his research, there are reward centers in our brain that light up when we socially interact. What's a reward center? It's a little place in our brain that makes us feel good and rewarded about any interaction. So how do we transition this into our business? Well, just like we have reward centers, so do our customers. And if we want to keep them engaged with our brand, we need to make sure they feel rewarded by interacting with us. We need to concentrate on having conversations that are interesting to them. Because if our conversations pique the interest of the audience, then our social interactions have just made an amazing impact. So then the real question becomes, are my customers interested in what I have to say? I'm going to be really honest with you right now. No, they probably aren't. Customers are interested in what they want to hear, and we all are. And sometimes we get lucky, but very rarely. So today we're going to look at some tools that can help you understand what your customers want to hear and to provide you with the insights to move forward and create some serious ROI. Just like all of your other business strategies, what we're looking to do is optimize our programs. Linguistic optimization is something that can benefit even the shortest conversations you have in daily business, and it can easily be incorporated into targeting communication programs. So what does linguistic optimization consist of? As I hinted at earlier, the first step is to look at your customer conversations and acknowledge that they can be better. If you don't think that they can, then you're probably wrong. Your customer communications, just like all of your other business practices, can always be better. As such, I encourage all of you to go back to the drawing board and start streamlining those conversations with these tips. Fostering trust and authenticity, making your offer relevant, and creating measurable value. Let's take a closer look. One of the first lessons we learn in life is don't talk to strangers. And we all know that creating trust with our customers is very important. If you're in the finance industry, for example, you know that your customers have to trust your communications, or they likely won't continue to bank with you. So fostering trust and familiarity is really important when communicating to customers, and creating an authentic connection is invaluable. To give you an example of when trust and authenticity comes to play, I'm going to show you an example of a fraud notification that has been optimized, and it will point out key features that instill trust in the listener. Here we go. In this script, the first thing we see is that the message is personalized to the customer named Jane. Secondly, we get an introduction of who is calling and an almost immediate reason as to why the message is being sent and what value the customer will have from listening. Tertiary, the message advises that the client go into the actual branch with identification or to seek further information from the number on the card, rather than providing a phone number, so that Jane knows for certain that this is her branch calling and not some scammer. Lastly, the script goes further to emphasize that the customer's data is no longer at risk by assuring that ABC Bank will never ask you to verify personal information over the phone or in an email. But as Nelson Mandela mentioned earlier, we can't just use the right words. We need the right sentiment in the message to create a true level of trust. Let's take a listen.
Hi, Jane. This is ABC Bank calling to notify you that a temporary block has been placed on your debit card. As a result, you will not be able to access your account for debit transactions or online banking. Please visit your nearest branch at your earliest convenience to verify all transactions and to change your PIN number. These tasks must be completed in person and with the proper identification. ATM PIN changes and emergency transactions may be conducted by calling the number on the back of your debit card, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. ABC Bank will never ask you to verify personal information over the phone or in an email. If you have received this message in error, please call 1-855-555-1234 to opt out. Thank you.
So as you can hear, the voice and the tone of the message can make a big difference. With an authentic, real voice on the other end of the message, you can create that feeling of privacy, trust, and authenticity. Tracy, would you like to share some benefits to the trust factor?
I would love to. Thanks, Marcia. I want to get everyone thinking about one thing for a minute, and that is what happens when people don't trust your company. So obviously in certain industries like banking, finance, insurance, the trust factor is going to be much more obvious when you're thinking about whether or not people are going to continue to do business with you. If you don't trust your bank, you're probably not going to be able to continue to do business with them. Really what we're talking about when we get into trust is comfort. So people do business with brands that they're comfortable with. If you're not able to create that level of trust and comfort with your customers, they're most likely going to leave for one reason or another, or they're just going to kind of fall off because they don't have any kind of loyalty to you. So by making sure that you try to communicate in a fashion that is going to create that trust is always really important. So when you're thinking about any kind of communications, whether that's internal or external, you want to make sure that they are going to be able to generate the level of trust that you're looking for. We actually have one really cool example at SPLICE with one of the banks that we do business with. We host an inbound line for them, so anybody who receives outbound messaging can call in if they have any questions or concerns and things like that. And we actually had someone call in once just to tell the bank that they really appreciated the messages and that they trusted the bank because they had received this message. So that was really cool for us because it was a really obvious example that messaging can generate that level of trust. So going back to that, just focusing on fostering that familiarity and comfort level with your customers so that you don't have to worry about trust being an issue.
Thanks, Tracy. Now let's talk about the importance of a relevant message. We've all said the phrase, "you lost me," and how did you feel in those scenarios? Most likely not very rewarded. So making sure that the content of your message, whether email, phone, or another channel, is relevant to your organization's audience is key in activating those all-important reward centers we talked about earlier. One way to do this is to pay closer attention to the customer's needs and to personalize your message to those needs. The more relevant the message, the more likely your customers are to respond. And another way to build a relevant message is to use them to make your customers' interactions with you simpler. Let's take a look at an example of this. Now, hopefully you are some of the lucky few who haven't had to deal with an insurance claim. I, unfortunately, am not. So if you're in the same boat as me, along with almost 50% of claimants, you found that the claims process was long, slow, and most likely difficult. So what if we could change all of that? What if we could use the information that we have readily available to create a really impactful and relevant message? From this message here, we can gather that Luke submitted a claim, and because his insurer knows he is likely wondering about the status, they've sent a simple reminder letting him know that the claim is being processed. And they're also letting him choose his next step. If he has no questions, he can simply check his inbox and file away his confirmation, or he can press 1 and be connected to a live agent who's ready to help Luke on his next step. And that final sentence there, that leaves Luke feeling valuable and taken care of in 23 seconds. It can be that easy. According to a 2014 study of 75,000 consumers, loyalty is not all about delighting consumers. Instead, it's about reducing their effort, as we've done here with Luke. Tracy, what kind of benefit do you see in making customer communications more relevant?
Well, I think it's probably pretty obvious to all of us that an irrelevant communication is totally useless. So I'm going to frame this in terms of costs for a minute. So let's say I'm sending out a direct mail package to one of my claimants, and it has a ton of important information in it, which is why I'm sending it out as a direct mail package. But as a consumer, I never look at anything in my mail because I get everything else sent to me electronically. So when I receive that, I don't give it the importance that it needs because it's just not relevant to me. Although the data might be, the channel isn't. So what I have done as a business is I have just wasted all of the money, and now, I mean, of course, it's not like a huge amount of money to send out a direct mail package, but I have wasted that money on somebody who is not going to look at it because it is irrelevant. So when we're talking about relevance, using the data is important. Also using customers' preferences is important. So not only this is the information that they need, but how do they want to receive that information? Are they more likely to read it in an email? Are they more likely to understand it if they get a live agent calling them? We need to be asking people those questions. Otherwise, we can't actually make an educated decision on what is relevant and what is not.
Great. Let's talk about making sure that your customer communications add that value. So now that we've seen how to create a trusted and relevant message, let's take a look at how to keep those messages short and sweet. Forrester's latest report states that 77% of consumers agree that valuing their time is the most important thing a company can do for them. This means keeping your messages, regardless of channel, concise and targeted. But more than that, it's about making sure that once your consumers finished with your interaction, they've received value from it. Value can be created in a variety of ways: a physical reward, time saved, and the list goes on. So here's a good rule to remember. We're all consumers. Think about the interactions that you have in your day-to-day that add value. Got one? Now think, why does it add value? You should be having that same conversation with yourself every time you're writing a customer communication. So let's take a look at an example that demonstrates this point a little further. Here we have a personalized appointment reminder that, again, uses customer data to ensure the message is relevant and clear. But the real value created here is twofold. Firstly, the message is quick and painless, giving the recipient all the information they need in less than 30 seconds. Secondly, the company is completing the customer's request at their own home, making it so they don't have to be inconvenienced at all by using their service, which again makes the customer's life easier and saves them time in their day. Tracy, let's hear your comments.
Yeah, again, like as Marcia mentioned, we're all consumers. We know in our day-to-day life what's going to make our lives easier and what's going to make our lives more difficult. So when we're looking at creating our customer communications, we need to keep that top of mind, and I can't actually stress that enough, is that every time you interact with your customer, it should make their life easier. This is going to make it so they like interacting with you, and they're going to give you more leeway in the different things you can communicate with them about. So, I mean, at the end of the day, all you want to be doing is being able to keep collecting money from our customers. So we want them to continue paying monthly programs. We want them to come into our store and buy some more fabric or some more furniture. We want them to come in and we want them to continue to want to do business with us. They want to do business with us because we're the easiest interaction that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. So at SPLICE, we actually try and focus on that every day, not only with the clients that we work with, but with our direct client relations, is how can we make our clients' life easier so that they want to continue to do business with us because they have the most fun doing business with us. So every time you're thinking about those things, just try and take it back to yourself and say, what would make my life easier? It'll also make their life easier.
Perfect, thanks. Now that we know what we have to create a trustworthy, authentic, relevant, and timely message that creates value, let's dig a little deeper into how to do that. Here are a few other best practices to keep your messaging top of mind with your customers. The first one is a really important one. Common speech is riddled with contractions, and although we sometimes avoid contractions in written form, it's a must for sounding conversational. So use all the contractions that are necessary and use them wisely on the phone. Secondly, when we speak, we tend to use shorter sentences. That doesn't mean we say less. What it means, however, is that our sentences are normally less convoluted and less complicated than written form. The mouth will always prefer to use shorter sentences because it allows for normal breathing, intonation, and natural pauses. So try to stick to a simple sentence structure that's still pithy without compromising on sentiment. Next, shorter words sound better. The mouth is most comfortable using 1 or 2 syllable words, and the listening ear recognizes these words more easily than others. So take a moment and think about the words I'm using in the next sentence. We have utilized our intelligence on the importance of vernacular and are struck with the realization that the implication of specialized speech is immense and may be proliferated over time. Did you like hearing that? Chances are you weren't having much fun, and neither was I. That was pretty hard to say. So you might change your mind if I were to say, we're amazed at the effect of using targeted and linguistically optimized language for customers, and we believe that the results will only improve over time. I'm saying the same thing in both scenarios, but I'm using simple and direct language in the second. In 2013, Forrester explained that customers expect interactive and engaging conversations. Linguistic optimization means satisfying that customer desire to hear something personalized and interesting. It means making customer connections and retaining those connections. And as you saw with the samples, you want to strive to use your customer data to personalize your conversations. There is, however, one very big but in this scenario. Organizations can collect customer data through a variety of sources for a variety of reasons. But the data that you use needs to add value to your message. There's that word again, value. Let me give you a quick example. Anyone know their personal bank account number? Those 16 digits off the top of your head? I know that I'm lucky to remember my phone number on a good day. So if my bank called with a message that had my account number in it, it would add no value. And frankly, it would compromise my private information. What if I had given them a public number and the message was left on a voicemail? It's bad on all accounts. So before you add customer data to your communications, make sure it's really adding that value that we're talking about. Another best practice, or more like a requirement in this scenario, is to keep your conversations legal. What I mean by this is to make sure your organization is legally compliant when communicating. How can you do that? Really, the only way is to make sure that someone in your organization knows the legislation, like the CRTC and CASL in Canada and the FCC in the United States. For example, in October 2013, the FCC made it illegal in the USA for organizations to contact their customers on mobile devices with automated solicitations. Without knowing the legislation, you're making yourself very susceptible to huge fines and negative brand imagery. So if anyone would like some links to legislation or further learnings about being legally compliant, don't hesitate to contact me after the webinar. I'd be happy to help you out. With legislation on the top of mind, what are some of the ways we can make sure we're safe? First, make sure you identify who you are in the message and state your purpose. And always give your customers the option to say, no thank you, I don't want to receive these messages anymore, by providing an opt-out or an unsubscribe. And lastly, focus your outreach programs on warm leads. As I'm sure we've all heard, it's 7 times easier to keep a customer than it is to find a new one. If you're calling people with an event invitation, for example, you'll have much better luck and response from your current customers or people who have been in the store recently. These are who we call an existing business relationship. And an even better strategy is to provide your customers and prospects with options to opt in to customer communications from your brand. With these types of systems in place, your customer's permissions trumps all the legislation, ensuring that you're good to go with your communications. Let's take a look at an example of a VIP invitation to a warm lead. So as you can see, this message has 2 chances to opt out. And although opt-outs are historically low, the consumer should always have the choice. The first opt-out is within 20 seconds of the message to appease the FCC. And there's one at the end of the message. In this case, if people receive this particular message on their voicemail, they can call that number to opt out. Secondly, to nurture express consent, there's a strategically placed opt-in in the message. Finally, and very importantly, especially when crafting messages with legal pieces, the tone of the message is grateful in order to drive loyalty. Let's take a listen.
Hi, Jake. This is John Lavender, store manager with ABC Furniture in Seattle. We'd like to thank you, our preferred customer, for your business with an exclusive invitation. Join the ABC family as we celebrate heading into our 50th year with a VIP event this Saturday, December 13th. All attendees will receive an exquisite china set as our complimentary gift to you. Please press 1 at any time to opt out. To continue receiving VIP invitations from ABC, please press 9. We'll have refreshments for you and your family to enjoy while attending this event. For more details, please call us at 123-444-5566. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you this Saturday, December 13th from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. here at the ABC Furniture Store in Seattle. To hear this message again, or to opt out if you no longer wish to receive automated notifications from ABC, please call 800-123-4567. Thanks so much, and bye for now.
Tracy, would you like to share some of your retail experience and how a legally compliant message can still be well branded to create that loyalty?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Marcia. So one thing I want to state just off the top here in terms of the legal compliance and the collecting the permissions is that we're looking at obviously a voice notification here, but you want to make sure that you're doing the same things in all of your different channels. So in your email, in your call center, automated messages, direct mail. We want to try and use all of our channels to maximize the amount of opportunity that we have to collect those preferences. So just start out with that. I mean, we always at SPLICE try to recommend as wide of an opt-in program as possible because what that actually does is it eliminates the legal requirements. So if someone has told you specifically, I want this, I have given you my permission to send me these things, then there's really nothing that the FCC can say about that. They have told us that's what we want. So that's kind of the main focus in terms of legal and even in, again, we're specifically talking about retail in this scenario, but in any industry as well, if you have that permission, you're 100% safe. In terms of retail in particular now, we're looking at an invitation here. When you're thinking about legal language, I mean, everybody's read it. It is dull, it is dry, it is boring, it is not relationship-y. The people who write these things are not marketers. They have no interest in making that type of language interesting or engaging for your customers. So what you want to make sure that you're doing is obviously you need to have the legally compliant things in there. Also, we don't recommend you hide them. So a lot of people try and say, well, this isn't interesting. We don't really want people to know this or to read this. Let's just put it in really tiny print at the bottom of their contract. So that they can avoid it. We don't recommend doing that. What we do recommend is pointing out the things that are important enough to have to be pointed out, but phrasing them in a way that is still working towards building that relationship. So let me just give you an example in terms of an opt-out. In this message, there's the slug that says, please press 1 at any time to opt out. That is a specific request to somebody to opt out. If you were trying not to get them to opt out, and you wanted them to you want them to know they have the option, but you don't necessarily want them to do that. Instead of specifically using the words opt out, you can use things like change your preferences and things like that just let people know that they are allowed to make the decision and obviously give them the mechanism to make that decision. So in an email, a checkbox, being able to call into your call center and opt out if you're using call center services. So there's always the option, but framing it in a way so they know what it is, but that you're not specifically calling them out to do something like that.
That's great. Thanks for those insights. Since we're talking about being legal, let's talk about safety. So in line with keeping you compliant, it's important for your customers to know that their information is safe with your organization, especially if you're implementing omni-channel communication programs like Tracy was talking about. So it's always a great idea to have an easily accessible and legible privacy policy. But it's not just enough to post it on your website at the bottom of the page. Make sure that all your employees know what you do with your customers' data so that anyone can address customer concerns at any time. Have your frontline staff point out any clauses that are unusual and create that additional level of trust with them that will keep them coming back. Secondly, make sure that all of your internal data policies and any of your vendors are fully legally compliant as well. You don't want to be doing business with someone who's going to sell all your customer data to a third party as soon as they get their hands on it. Lastly, use authentication to verify your customer's identity. In some industries, primarily finance and banking, it's really important to make sure you're doing business with the right person. So make sure you're using appropriate authentication mechanisms before referencing customer data, whether you're using outbound or inbound interactions. Let's take a look at one more example of a message that contains some safety features. So in this outbound phone message, there are 2 stages to the authentication before you can even know the reason why the message is being sent. Making authentication a 2-stage process does a couple of different things. Number 1, it creates an interaction that's fully secure. And number 2, it deters people who are not, in this case, the account holder, leaving you only with individuals who can, in fact, take action on the account. So there's some cost savings in there as well. Another recommendation that comes hand in hand with the outbound message is authentication within your inbound IVRs. And the most streamlined experience is to put them both together to create the easiest interaction possible.
Hi, Stan. This is an important call from ABC Telecom in Ottawa regarding your account. If you are the primary account holder, please press 1 now. To ensure customer security, authentication is required before proceeding. Please listen carefully for your authentication instructions. Please use your touch-tone phone to enter your birth year. Thank you for authenticating. The reason we called is because we have not yet received payment for your service, and your account is now overdue. Please press 1 now to be transferred to our self-service payment processing system, or please press 2 to connect to a live agent. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Tracy, do you have any examples you'd like to share?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Marcia. So in terms of security, again, I'm going to kind of start off on a high level. Everybody has so much data out in the world nowadays that the opportunity for that data to become compromised is much more obvious than it used to be years ago at the beginning of the internet, when we were looking at banking transactions and things through the internet. So everybody nowadays is much more aware that these data privacy policies and security level agreements are they're just now required. So first of all, just in general, don't do business with any vendor who is not going to make sure that your data is going to be safe. So just number 1 on that. In terms of keeping it safe, now when you're looking at this example, you might think that, well, this is kind of a long authentication process. Like first I have to press 1, then I have to enter my birth year, and that's kind of what we call a 2-stage authentication. Now, I want you to think about any scenarios. I'm going to give you a specific one that I have experienced myself. Calling into my bank and them asking me my personal security questions, which I did not create. I do not know who created them. I think the bank created them. And me not being able to answer my own questions to actually get into my own account. Much worse experience than me having to press 1 and then type in my birth year to get my message and actually streamline my experience. So Again, this is a specifically banking example, but we have similar issues that we've seen in retail. I mean, look at the Target data breach that happened earlier this year. That was huge, and credit card information got leaked everywhere, and a lot of retailers, or especially big ticket retailers, are collecting customer credit card information on a daily basis to make sure they can process their transactions. So you really need to make sure that that data is locked down, and the best way to do that is to have streamlined but secure authentication programs.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Tracy. So now that we know what to put into our messages to give them value and make them legal, let's take a look at message delivery and see how that impacts the need for linguistic optimization. When we're trying to determine the best way to deliver our optimized messages, we only really need to look at one thing. Did our customer tell us how they'd like to receive the message? If your answer is yes, then proceed to the next question. But if your answer is no, then let's go back to the drawing board. All you need to do is ask your customer. You can use surveys, point-of-sale solutions. The possibilities are endless. According to Forrester research from this year, customers in general prefer phone and online channels, but don't take that for gospel. We want to know how each individual customer wants their information. Once you have that information from your customers, then you can effectively do the following things. Manage their expectations. Forrester says that 69% of U.S. consumers would like to move between customer service channels, i.e. from chat to telephone. So know your customers, and you have a good idea of how they'd like to be contacted. It's very important to meet those expectations, because if you don't, say goodbye to reward center activation that we talked about earlier. You want to market to their values. Remember how valuable it is for humans to connect? Well, make sure to not only market your products to your customers, but really make sure you take their needs and wants into account. Let your customers dictate your service. Lastly, measure everything. As with any successful project, tracking results and analyzing is the only way to progress. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. With an ongoing value-based communication program, your customers will give you the benefit of the doubt. Plus, sometimes mistakes are the best way to learn. So implement A/B testing strategies that you can measure to continue to build the strongest relationship possible. And again, here's a great quotation to bring these words to light. Your customer conversation should take your real customers into account. Or as Don Pepper says, integrated marketing incorporates an individual's customer's own perspectives into all customer-facing functions. The point is, a truly integrated marketing plan should feel seamless to the customer. The more seamless the experience, the more it'll benefit your organization. So now we've come to it. How to turn all of this advice into money. I'm going to pass it off to Tracy to discuss where we can find the ROI in our customer conversations. Take it away.
Thanks, Marcia. So there's kind of two different ways that we can go about putting money back into our pockets, and everybody's familiar with those. So it is saving money and earning more money. By doing both of those things, we can overall increase the revenues that we're looking at as an organization. So we've touched on a couple of these as we went out, so I'm just going to dive into them in a little bit more detail. So first of all, inbound call volumes. Any activity that you have going on in your business that has a person doing it is more costly than anything you have going on in your business that is automated by a machine. Again, something that we already know. So specifically here, we're talking about call centers, and even more specifically, we're talking about segments of an organization that are acting as a call center who are not actually call centers. So the number of times that we see this where we have happens a lot in nonprofit, it happens a lot in banking as well in terms of like fraud departments. People whose job it is to do other things are spending their time making phone calls on behalf of the organization to either collect funds, outstanding accounts, or making really quick notifications to people for things that they need to know, for example, the fraud notifications. Those are very expensive activities. What you want to try and do is minimize those. I'm not saying to eliminate them. We're never going to eliminate call centers, and we don't want to eliminate call centers. It's very important in the well-rounded omni-channel marketing program. But what we want to do is we want to minimize the interactions to make them the most valuable that we can. So I'm going to use insurance companies as an example here. So often they have their claim examiners, which are people who are generally fairly well-paid claims examiners, answering inbound calls into the call center. The majority of these calls that come in are questions that could very easily be managed in a proactive outbound notification program. So again, whether that customer's preference is email, phone, what have you, giving them the information they need proactively can significantly increase the number of interactions that are required on the back end to fix the information we didn't get proactively. So if these people are receiving proactive notifications, they no longer have to call into the call center for little tiny questions that are not going to be the best use of your claims examiner's time. So now these individuals, whether it's claims examiners or any other call center service, can focus on the things where they add the most value. So somebody who's really great at doing cold calling and getting brand new prospects sold on your product or service, those people should not be spending their time answering customer questions. They should be spending their time generating new business. So by decreasing that inbound call volume, one, you're going to have cost savings because you actually have a smaller amount of inbound call volume. Your people have more time to work on more value-added activities. So it's kind of a twofold win on that front. In terms of traffic, this one's targeted more directly at retail, but again, this is pretty self-explanatory here. An increase in traffic generally is going to show you an increase in sales. So what retailers are really good at is maintaining what they call a close ratio. So that's the number of people who come into the store, how many of them can we close and turn them into a sale. So the more traffic we have coming into the store, the more of those people, assuming we maintain that close ratio, are going to make a purchase. So that is going to, just an increase in traffic alone is going to increase your sales. Now, something that's kind of on the qualitative side and not so much the quantitative side is that if you have worked really hard in your communication programs to your customers to build a valued relationship, they are also going to be more likely to buy something. Once they come into the store, they're more likely to upgrade, they're more likely to buy additional services. So if you're a bank and you've done a really great job communicating with your customers throughout their life cycle, and now they're in that stage where they're going to get a mortgage, like they're going to come to you. There's just not even any option in their mind. They already have that relationship with you. They're going to come. So again, that's not so much traffic driving sales, but that is driving the additional sales just from that one-on-one relationship. Now, building those one-on-one relationships is going to do one other thing for you. It is also going to create word-of-mouth referrals. So this is biggest within family groups. And again, this is huge, huge, huge for banks and insurers. So how many people on the call today, when you think about it, are with their bank or with their insurer because those two businesses did a good job with their parents? I know that's the case for me. So growing up, my parents banked with one bank, and when it came time for me to get my very first bank account, that was the bank I went to. There was just, I never heard them say anything bad about it. They always had really good experience there. They always had really good reps, so there's no reason for me not to go there. So that word-of-mouth referral has just demonstrated a brand new account. I know I've recently had, on the flip side of that, a really bad experience with a brand that I totally loved. And I had a really bad experience with the credit card that they had and the inbound call experience to try and pay it. Such a bad experience that I immediately went to Twitter and tweeted about it, warning people of these different scenarios that we're having with this organization. So as you can see on the flip side of that, a negative word of mouth really can be detrimental to your business. So I'm not going to do business with this organization again, and now I have put it out into the webosphere that other people shouldn't either. So not only is it good word of mouth, we'll give you new accounts, bad word of mouth will lose you accounts. And then lastly, in terms of channel fees, really what we're looking at here is we all know the channels like email and things are much cheaper than direct mail or call center calls and anything like that. What we're talking about here is making sure that you're using your customer's preference to determine what channel they're being communicated to in. So you might have, so let's take a personal example for me. So my grandma, not going to use the internet. Probably most people's grandmas probably aren't in that age range unless they're super cool grandmas. So sending an email, even if there's an email address on their account, is probably useless. And again, it costs next to nothing to send an email, but it just is useless in building that relationship, so it is money not well spent. Similar thing can go in there different industries, so like the gaming industry, for example, online gaming. These are people who want to be communicated with digitally. They don't want you to call them either with an automated call center call. They just don't call them. Don't call them. So if you are calling them for whatever scenario, again, regardless of the cost of that one single call, it is not adding value to your organization. Therefore, it is losing you money. So what we want to recommend to everybody is make sure you have the practices in place, again, in all of the different places where you touch your customer, to let them tell you how they want to be communicated with, and then communicate with them in that channel. It's going to build the trust, it's going to build that ongoing relationship, and it's overall going to give your organization cost savings because you're limiting your channel expenditure to just the people who are most likely to respond in that channel.
Thanks so much, Tracy. So in summary, today we provided you with the tools and learnings on the fact that your relationships benefit from greater conversations, that linguistically optimized customer communications garner more attention. And last but not least, always remember to use our best practices to create your messages, because you'll see that money coming in as Tracy just explained. Thanks for your participation today. We'll take some questions now.
As a reminder, please feel free to submit your questions on Twitter with the hashtag ConversationROI or through the chat window. We've had a couple come in already, so let's start with those. Marcia and Tracy, please answer as you see fit. The first question we have here is, how can I measure the effectiveness of my current customer communication?
Oh, really great question. I'll go ahead and take a crack at it first, Marcia, if you don't mind.
No worries.
So the number one most important thing in measuring the effectiveness of the campaign is to know what your goal is before you start. So there's really no going back in time. If you launch a customer communications campaign and you don't have a goal for that, you're not going to be able to measure the effectiveness because you don't know what you're measuring the effectiveness against. So number one, you need to make sure that you have a really defined goal and KPIs that are associated with that program. KPIs are key performance indicators, so they're different based on the communications program. Again, for retail, maybe you're looking at driving traffic and sales, so maybe traffic and sales are the two that you're looking for out of your communications. In terms of insurance, maybe it's a decreased inbound call volume to those call centers. For banking, it might be a number of accounts that can be upgraded to a mortgage. Whatever you're trying to accomplish by your communication, you should be able to kind of define that goal before. If you don't have a goal, don't send out the communication. There's going to be no value added to your customers or to the business. So make sure that there is for sure a communication goal with each of your programs. Now, in terms of measuring the effectiveness, again, you want to define the measurement that goes along with the goal. So traffic is a really easy one. As an example, I'm going to be measuring traffic. So I'm going to have a traffic clicker standing at my door, and I'm going to click when everybody comes in the door, and I'm going to know what my traffic was this Saturday versus last Saturday. in terms of some of the things you want to think about too in terms of your communication programs is some goals are short-term. So again, with the VIP invitation, we're having a VIP event this weekend. Come in on Saturday. We're going to track the traffic on Saturday. Very simple, short-term communication goal. But a lot of times the goals can be longer term. So again, with the example of the mortgages, if you have people who are coming on board with brand new bank accounts when they're 12 years old, obviously they're not in the market for a mortgage, but what you want to do is kind of track certain things as you go. So whether that's, okay, so when they turned 18, then they got a credit card, and you can put all these different flags in your data that say, okay, now we've got this person to a certain point in their relationship with us. We want to give them this message to upgrade to the next thing because we believe that this is their stage of life right now. Again, better way to do that instead of assuming they're in the stage of life is just let them tell you that they're in the market for a mortgage, and then you can send them information. Measuring the effectiveness is really just being able to track your data. So as long as you can track your data, you're going to be in good shape. Make sure that any vendor that you're doing business with is tracking the correct data. So if we do something that's called a communication brief. So it's kind of an outline of what are the communication goals, and then what are the measurables that coming out of that. So at SPLICE, we know what we need to track in order to show that there has been success on that program. So make sure that when you're working with your vendors that you either provide them with that or that you're working hand in hand with them to make sure that that exists. And then put a date on it. So we always try to say make everything dated. So if you're going to measure the effectiveness of a certain campaign, make sure you know by this date, this is when I want to have the results. This is when I want to make a call on whether or not this was effective or not. So I can either roll it out or I can roll it back. So yeah, those are my tips on measuring the effectiveness of a program.
Great, thanks so much, Tracy. The second question I had come in: how can I show the value of optimized customer conversations to upper management?
Oh, this is always a fun one. This is always a question. It comes in every single time we do anything that's creative or more, I guess, as I said before, qualitative. So what we always recommend, or what I always recommend, is A/B testing. So what A/B testing is, for people who don't know, is taking two groups of similar people and giving them different messages. So what we do often is something we call a champion and challenger program. So you have your current customer communications that are going out. Those are your champion. That's what has worked for you so far. And we're going to have this segment of people that are going to be on the challenger program. So we have a new program challenging the old program to see, can I do better with this new program, or can I not do better with this new program? So when you're talking to upper management, it's really good to try and make everything bite-sized, so like easily digestible for the upper management to say, yes, okay, this is easy, it's not expensive, we're just going to do it, we're going to try it, and then figure out if it works. So whether you think of it as like a bite-sized program, baby steps, anything along those lines of just like a really tiny test, that's going to be much easier to sell to upper management than like a giant rollout. We need to linguistically optimize all our customer conversations throughout the entire organization. I mean, if you said that, it sounds huge. The upper management is just going to be like, no, that sounds expensive. Even if it's not, they're just going to say, no, it's too big. We can't, our brains can't handle that right now. So make it bite-sized, and then the best thing about that is once you've actually executed a little tiny pilot program or challenger program, then you have results for your organization. So a lot of times when vendors are selling you new programs or services, they're going to show you case studies, and they're going to show you a lot of different things to convince you that this works for your organization. That's great. Sometimes that's enough, but it's much easier to sell upper management once they know that this specific thing works for your specific business. So by doing these little bite-sized challenger programs, you can say, hey, we've looked at this with our actual customers, and this either works or it doesn't. Of course, hopefully we hope it works because it's our recommendation. But now we know that this works for us. Let's try it with a little bit of a bigger chunk. And then we roll it out to a little bit of a bigger chunk, and we make sure it works with that chunk. And then once it works with that, it's just going to proliferate through the organization, and people are going to actually be asking you for it instead of you asking them to let you go ahead and do it. So my recommendation with upper management is always make it small, make it as inexpensive as possible, and make it just make it a little commitment. Don't make it seem like it's a huge commitment that they're agreeing to. Let them just try and agree to a test, and then it'll be much easier for you in the long run.
Great, thank you so much for your response, Tracy. It looks like that's all of our questions, so please remember to watch your email for a copy of our most recent white paper. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.